She walked into Le Vesper on King Street with $85 in a white envelope and her daughter's hand in hers. The girl was 7. Her dress had been stitched from 2 old ones the night before. Shanice did not look up at the chandelier, or pause at the menu printed in gold behind glass, or hesitate at the door. She walked straight to the podium. "Table for 2. It is my daughter's birthday." The hostess looked at her, then at the child, then down at the shoes. That look, the kind that has already decided everything about a person before that person has finished their first sentence. They gave her table 14, corner seat, right next to the kitchen door. Every time it swung open, the sound of pans and running water and someone calling out an order pushed into the dining room like it had not been invited. It was the table you give to someone you have already decided does not need the full experience. Shanice knew. She had worked enough jobs in enough rooms to know when a seat was a seat and when a seat was a message. She did not say anything. She pulled out the chair for Zuri and sat down across from her and opened the menu. The dining room at Le Vesper had 17 tables, white linen on every one. The silverware was heavy, the kind that feels different in your hand than the forks you use at home, the kind that tells you before you have even tasted anything that whatever comes next is going to cost more than you expected. The lighting was low and warm. It came from fixtures mounted on the exposed brick walls, each one angled to make the plates look like they were glowing from the inside. The chairs were upholstered in dark green velvet. The floor was hardwood original refinished to a shine that reflected the candlelight on every table. Zuri sat up straight. She placed both hands in her lap. She reached for the cloth napkin folded into a fan on the right side of her plate and unfolded it carefully and laid it across her knees the way her mother had taught her. They had practiced at home. 3 nights that week, paper towels and plastic plates on the kitchen table in their apartment in North Charleston. Shanice showing her which fork goes where and how to place the napkin, and how to say thank you when the waiter brings the water. Zuri had practiced until she got it right every time. She was 7 years old, and she was sitting in that chair like she had been coming here her whole life. Shanice opened the menu. The appetizers started at $22. The entrees ranged from $38 to $61. She had $85 in the envelope in her bag. She had already done the math at home twice, once on paper and once in her head on the bus ride over. 1 appetizer, the roasted beet salad, $22, split between them. 1 entree for Zuri, the grilled chicken, $38. 1 glass of water. Tax would bring it to somewhere around $67. Tip, 15%, another 10. Total $77. She would have $8 left. She was not going to order anything for herself. When Zuri asked, she would say she already ate before they left. She had not eaten since the toast she had at 6 that morning before her shift at Benny's. The waiter came. Young man, early 20s. He set down 2 glasses of water. He placed the glass at the table to their left with both hands and a small nod. When he got to Shanice, he set the glass down with one hand without stopping the way you place something on a surface while you are already walking past it. He did not make eye contact. He did not say anything. He moved on. Zuri did not notice. She was looking around the room with her eyes wide and her lips slightly parted, the expression of a child seeing something she had only imagined before. She looked at the candles. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at a woman 3 tables over who was wearing a necklace that caught the light every time she moved her head. She said, "Mama, this is the most beautiful place I have ever seen." Shanice looked at her daughter. The girl was sitting in a green velvet chair in a dress made from 2 old ones, with her napkin placed perfectly on her lap and her hands folded exactly the way she had been taught, and she was glowing. Not from the lighting, from something else entirely, from the simple fact of being 7 years old and sitting across from her mother in a place that felt like magic. Shanice looked at her, and $85 and 2 months of skipped lunches and walking instead of taking the bus became worth every single penny, every single step. She reached across the table and tucked a braid behind Zuri's ear. She said, "Happy birthday, baby." From the far end of the bar, Victoria Langford was watching. She had been the general manager of Le Vesper for 4 years, late 30s, black blazer, hair pulled back tight. The kind of posture that makes you look taller than you are, which is useful when your job requires you to control a room without raising your voice. She had noticed Shanice and Zuri the moment they walked in. She had watched the hostess seat them at 14 and had not intervened because 14 was exactly where she would have put them herself. Now she was watching from the bar with a glass of sparkling water in her hand and the particular expression of someone conducting an assessment they have already completed. She looked at Shanice's shoes. Canvas flats. The kind you buy at Family Dollar for $9 because the ones that actually hold up cost $35, and $35 is not something you spend on yourself when your daughter needs new socks, and the electric bill went up. $11 last month, and there is a birthday dinner, too. Save for that matters more than anything on your feet. Victoria looked at the shoes, then the bag, then back at the menu in Shanice's hands. She set her water down on the bar. She straightened her blazer with one hand, and she walked toward table 14. She arrived with a smile. It was the correct smile, the one they teach you in hospitality training, wide enough to appear warm, controlled enough to maintain authority. It had the right shape. It had no warmth behind it. She said, "Good evening. Are we enjoying our visit so far?" Shanice looked up. She said, "Yes. Thank you. We are ready to order." Victoria did not step back. She said, "Wonderful. I just wanted to make sure you are comfortable with the menu. Some of our guests find the pricing a bit unexpected. We would not want any discomfort when the check arrives." The sentence sat in the air between them. It was not a question. It was not a warning. It was a measurement. Victoria was measuring whether Shanice would flinch. Shanice did not flinch. She had been measured before, in waiting rooms, in office lobbies, in every store where a woman in her shoes walks in and someone behind a counter decides in the first 3 seconds whether she is a customer or a problem. She had been measured so many times, she no longer felt the instrument. She only saw the person holding it. She said, "I know the prices. I have read the menu. I would like to order the roasted beet salad and the grilled chicken, please." Victoria held her smile. She said, "Of course. Absolutely." She turned to leave. Then she stopped. She leaned toward the waiter who was standing near the service station and said, not whispering, but not quite at full volume, either the particular register of someone who wants to be overheard by the right people and not by the wrong ones, "Make sure we settle the check before the main course goes out." The waiter nodded. He did not look at Shanice when he nodded, but Shanice heard every word. She was supposed to. That was the point. The table to their right, a couple in their 50s, the woman in a cream-colored wrap, and the man in a sport coat, both turned slightly. The woman said something to the man, quiet. Behind her wine glass, the man glanced at Shanice and then looked away. They both smiled. Small, brief, the kind of smile that is not a smile at all, but a verdict delivered between two people who believe they are being discreet. Zuri heard the sound, not the words. She was 7. She did not understand what had been said or why the people at the next table were looking, but she heard the laughter. She felt the shift in the room, the way children feel things, not through understanding but through the skin, through the sudden change in temperature when the air around their mother goes tight. She looked down at her plate. She did not say anything. The appetizer arrived, 25 minutes late. Shanice had watched 2 tables that were seated after them receive their food first. When she asked the waiter politely if there was a delay, he said, "Kitchen is backed up tonight, should not be much longer." He said it without looking at her. He said it while already walking away. The roasted beet salad arrived. Shanice divided it onto 2 small plates. She gave Zuri the larger half. Zuri ate carefully, the way she had practiced at home. Fork in the left hand, knife in the right, small bites, napkin touched to the corner of her mouth after every third one. She was trying so hard. She was trying so hard to do everything right in this room that had already decided she did not belong in it. Victoria came back. This time, she did not smile first. She stood beside table 14 the way a person stands when they are no longer pretending to be casual. She said, "Ma'am, I apologize for the interruption. But several of our regular guests have expressed some concern about the dining atmosphere this evening. I am afraid this may not be the most suitable setting for your family tonight. Perhaps another time. She said it with the careful diction of someone who had rehearsed this kind of sentence before, pleasantly, professionally. The way a door closes when the person closing it wants you to believe it was never open in the first place. Shanice set down her fork. She looked at Victoria. She did not look away. She did not look at the other tables, or at the ceiling, or at the door. She had stood in rooms like this before. She had stood in front of people who looked at her and saw only what they expected to see and nothing else. She had learned a long time ago that the look in their eyes said everything about who they were and nothing at all about who she was. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask to speak to someone else. She sat there, still, steady, the way a person sits when they have done nothing wrong and they know it completely and they are not going to perform guilt for someone else's comfort. Victoria waited. The silence between them stretched. Victoria said, "I can comp the appetizer for your trouble, but I do need to ask you and your daughter to leave. It is restaurant policy to protect the experience of all our guests." Shanice stood. Slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out the white envelope. She placed it on the table flat, directly in front of Victoria. She said, "Every dollar in this envelope is real. I came here tonight because my daughter turned 7 years old today, and I promised her a dinner at a real restaurant. That is all I came for." Victoria looked at the envelope. She did not touch it. She said, "I do not doubt that. But tonight, this is not the right place for you." 9 words, delivered without heat, without cruelty in the voice, but every person within earshot understood exactly what those 9 words carried inside them, every single one. Shanice picked up the envelope. She put it back in her bag. She held out her hand. Zuri took it. They stood together beside table 14, the birthday table, the table next to the kitchen door, the table with the leftover beet salad and the cloth napkin that Zuri had placed perfectly across her lap because her mother had taught her. "How?" Zuri looked up. She looked at her mother's face. She said, "Mama, did we do something wrong?" The room changed. Not the lights, not the music, not any physical thing, but something in the air shifted the way it shifts when a child says something so simple and so true that every adult in the room is forced to hear it, whether they want to or not. The waiter near the service station stopped moving. The couple at the next table went quiet. Victoria's jaw tightened by a fraction of an inch, small enough that only someone paying close attention would have seen it. Shanice did not answer standing up. She knelt down. Right there, on the hardwood floor of Le Vesper, in front of the velvet chairs and the linen tablecloths and the low golden light, she knelt down until her eyes were level with her daughter's eyes, and she held both of Zuri's hands in hers, and she said, "No, baby, we did not do anything wrong, not one single thing." She stood up. She held Zuri's hand. She walked toward the door. She did not look back. Her spine was straight. Her shoulders were level. She was not performing strength. She was not making a statement. She was just walking out of a room that had decided she did not belong in it, the way she had walked out of rooms like that before, with her daughter's hand in hers, and nothing broken inside her that was not already familiar with being broken. At table 7, near the window facing King Street, a woman sat alone. Geneva Hart, 67 years old. Silver hair pulled into a low knot at the back of her neck, a dark green shawl over one shoulder. She had been eating alone the way she often did on Tuesday evenings, at Le Vesper, a habit she had kept for nearly 3 years, ever since she stopped cooking for herself at home, because cooking for one person, after a lifetime of cooking for hundreds, had become a kind of silence she did not care to sit with. She had watched the entire thing. From the moment Shanice and Zuri sat down at 14, from the water glass set down with one hand, from Victoria's first visit to the table, from the laughter at the next table, from the appetizer that arrived late, from every single thing that had happened in this room in the last 40 minutes. She had not stood up, she had not intervened, she had not said a word, but she had put her fork down somewhere around the time Victoria asked Shanice to leave, and she had not picked it up again. Her plate was still half full. She was not going to finish it. She watched Shanice walk to the door. She did not watch her back. She watched her hands. The way the fingers held the child's hand. Firm, steady. The grip of someone who has been holding things together for a very long time and has stopped counting the cost. She watched the shoulders. Straight. Not stiff. Not braced. Just straight. The posture of a woman who had been carrying weight long enough that her body had simply learned to stand under it without negotiating. Geneva recognized that. She had carried it herself. 40 years ago, in a kitchen on John's Island, with flour on her hands and a restaurant no bank would fund and a daughter she was raising alone. She recognized it the way you recognize a sound you have not heard in decades, but have never once forgotten. She set her napkin on the table. She did not call for the check. She sat there watching the door close, behind Shanice and Zuri, and something behind her eyes shifted. Not pity. Something sharper than pity. Something closer to recognition. The kind that does not ask permission before it changes what you do next. They walked 3 blocks south on King Street. The restaurants thinned out. The storefronts got smaller. The lighting changed from the warm golden glow of places that charged $38 for chicken to the flat white of convenience stores and the blue flicker of a laundromat that was still open at 9:15 on a Tuesday night. There was a taco truck parked on Meeting Street near the corner of Calhoun. Shanice had passed it 100 times on her way to her second job. She had never stopped because $3.50 for a taco was not something she spent on herself when she could make rice and beans at home for less than $1 a serving. She stopped tonight. She ordered 2 tacos, one for Zuri, one for herself, because Zuri would ask why she was not eating, and she did not want to lie to her daughter twice in one night. $7. She handed the man a 5 and 2 ones from the envelope in her bag, and she did not think about what $7 meant to the rest of the month, because tonight she was not going to do that math. They sat on a bench. Zuri ate her taco carefully, holding it with both hands the way small children hold things they do not want to drop. She did not mention the restaurant. She did not ask about the woman in the black blazer, or the people who laughed, or the reason they had to leave. She ate her taco, and she swung her feet, because the bench was too tall for them to reach the ground, and she looked at the street, and she said, "Mama, this taco is really good." Shanice looked at her daughter. She said, "It is." Shanice Odom was 29 years old. She had been a prep cook at Benny's Diner on Upper King Street for 3 years, 6 days a week, 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, $11.50 an hour. She cleaned offices for a company called Brighter Spaces from 4 in the afternoon to 8 in the evening, 4 days a week, $13 an hour. She woke up every morning at 5:15. She got home every night at 8:45. Somewhere in between, she packed Zuri's lunch for school and dropped her off at the bus stop on Rivers Avenue at 7:10 and picked up milk when it was on sale at the Piggly Wiggly for $3.29 a gallon, because the regular price was $4.18 and $4.18 was the difference between having enough for the electric bill and not. Zuri's father was named Deshaun. He had left when Zuri was 11 months old. There was no fight, no event, no dramatic collapse. One day he was there, and the next day he was not. The kind of leaving that when you look back on it, you realize the person had already been leaving for a long time before the door actually closed. Shanice did not talk about him. Not because it hurt, because there was nothing useful left to say about a man who had walked out on a woman and an 11-month-old baby and had not once in 6 years sent $1 or a letter or a question about how his daughter was doing. She paid rent. $840 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment in North Charleston on Dorchester Road. Zuri slept in the bedroom. Shanice slept on the couch. The couch had a broken spring on the left side that she covered with a folded towel so it would not press into her back at night. She had been meaning to replace it for 2 years. 2 years is a long time to mean to do something when every week the money goes to rent and groceries and electricity and bus fare and the $40 she paid Miss Thelma, the 71-year-old woman who lived across town, the hall, and watched Zuri every afternoon from 3:30 to 8:45. Miss Thelma only ever took $20 of those $40. She put the other 20 back in Zuri's jacket pocket with a piece of butterscotch candy and a note that said something like "for ice cream" or "hide this from your mama." Zuri always showed Shanice the note. Shanice always pretended to be surprised. The $85 in the envelope had taken 2 months to save. She had started in the middle of March. She skipped lunch at work every day. She walked to Benny's instead of taking the bus $2 each way, 5 days a week, $10 saved. She stopped buying the $1 coffee from the gas station on the corner of Dorchester and Reynolds that she had been buying every morning for 3 years because it was the one small thing she did for herself before the day began. She gave that up too. Every week she put $8 to $12 into the white envelope in the kitchen drawer behind the box of aluminum foil where Zuri would not find it. 8 weeks. 63 $1 bills. 2 5s, a 10. And a small collection of quarters she had been dropping in since April. They took the number 10 bus home. Zuri fell asleep on her shoulder before they reached the second stop. Shanice sat with her daughter's head against her arm and looked out the window. The city moved past in pieces. The lights of the restaurant district gave way to the yellow glow of street lamps. The storefronts gave way to houses. The houses got closer together. The sidewalks got narrower. She watched it all pass the way she watched it every night. The same route, the same window, the same slow transition from the part of Charleston that the tourists see to the part that keeps it running. She carried Zuri up the stairs, 2nd floor, apartment 4. She unlocked the door with one hand while holding Zuri against her shoulder with the other. She put her daughter in bed. She pulled the sheet up. She turned on the small nightlight, shaped like a moon that Zuri had picked out at the dollar store 2 years ago and had never once slept without. She went to the kitchen. She sat down at the table. She opened her bag. She took out the white envelope. She opened it. She counted the money. $85. Still there, all of it. She had not spent a cent at Le Vesper because she had been asked to leave before the main course. The appetizer had been comped. The money was whole. She put the envelope back in the drawer. She closed it. She sat there in the kitchen with the light from the stove hood casting a yellow glow across the table and the sound of Zuri breathing in the other room coming through the thin wall like something steady and permanent in a night that felt like neither. She did not cry. She just sat there. The way a person sits when they have done everything they could and it was not enough and they are not sure yet what to do with that. The next morning came the way mornings do when you work the kind of jobs Shanice worked, not gently, the alarm at 5:15. The shower that took 3 minutes because the hot water in building 4 ran out fast, and if you were not done by 5:20, you finished cold. The coffee she no longer bought, the lunch she no longer packed for herself, the walk down Dorchester Road to the bus stop where she caught the number 10 back into the city, the same route in reverse, the same window, the same slow transition from the part of Charleston that keeps it running to the part the tourists see. She was at Benny's by 6, apron on, knife out, cutting onions for the breakfast prep. The blade moved through each one in steady, even strokes, not fast, not flashy, just consistent. The rhythm of someone who has cut 10,000 onions before this one and whose hands have learned to do the work without being asked. She moved through the small kitchen the way a person moves through a space they know by feel, turning sideways to pass the other cook without looking, reaching behind her for the salt without checking where it was, stirring a pot with her left hand while flipping a pancake with her right, not because she was talented, but because she had done it so many times that her body had memorized the geometry of that kitchen the way a musician memorizes a song. They have played every day for 3 years. At 6:15, the front door opened. An older woman walked in alone. She sat at the counter. She ordered black coffee and a biscuit. She did not look at a menu. She sat and she drank her coffee slowly, and she looked through the pass-through window, the small rectangular opening between the kitchen and the counter where plates were pushed through. She watched Shanice work. She watched her hands. She watched the way the knife moved. She watched the way she turned in the tight space, avoiding the other cook's elbow without breaking stride, reaching for a whisk while still holding a spatula, moving with the unconscious efficiency of someone whose body has been shaped. by repetition, into something close to grace. Not polish, not training, just years. Years and years of the same small kitchen and the same movements, made 1,000 times until they stopped being effort and became something else. Geneva Hart, 67 years old. She had run restaurants for 35 years. She knew what training looked like. She knew what natural instinct looked like, and she knew the difference. What she was watching through that pass-through window was not either of those things exactly. It was something rawer, something underneath. The kind of relationship with food that does not come from a classroom or a cookbook, but from a life where cooking was never optional, where feeding people was not a career choice but a daily act of keeping the world from falling apart. Shanice finished her shift at 2. She came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on her apron. She saw the woman sitting at the counter. The same woman who had been sitting there for nearly 8 hours nursing coffees and reading a newspaper and watching the kitchen through the pass-through like she was studying something. Geneva looked up. She said, "How long have you worked here?" Shanice said. 3 years. Geneva said, "Who taught you to cook?" Shanice said, "Nobody. I watched and I figured it out." Geneva reached into the pocket of her jacket and placed a small white card on the counter. Simple, clean, black text on white stock. It read, "Second Table Culinary Mentorship. Free program for working adults. 3 evenings a week. All skill levels welcome." Geneva said, "There is a program. Free, evenings, if you are interested." Shanice looked at the card. She did not pick it up. She looked at the woman. She said, "Who are you?" Geneva said. "The woman who was sitting at table 7 last night." The air between them changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, but something shifted in the way Shanice looked at her, the way a person's posture tightens by a fraction when they realize the ground they are standing on is not exactly what they thought it was. Shanice said nothing. Geneva said, "I did not come here out of pity. I came because I saw something." She stood up. She placed a $5 bill on the counter for the coffee and the biscuit. She walked to the door. She did not look back. The card stayed on the counter. 3 days passed. Shanice did not call. The card sat on top of the refrigerator in her apartment, held in place by a butterfly magnet Zuri had picked out at a yard sale the previous summer. Every morning when Shanice reached for the cereal on the shelf above the fridge, she saw the card. Every morning she did not pick it up. Geneva Hart had grown up on Johns Island just outside Charleston. Her mother, Lorene, had been a cook in a school cafeteria for 22 years. 400 meals a day, $6.50 an hour. She stood over industrial stoves in a kitchen the size of a large closet, and she fed other people's children 5 days a week for more than 2 decades. And when she retired, the school hired someone else, and that was the end of it. No ceremony, no plaque, no mention. Just a woman who had spent 22 years making sure 400 children ate lunch every day, and then one day she stopped and the world continued as if she had never been standing there. Geneva had watched her mother cook every morning before school. She had stood on a step stool at 5 years old and stirred whatever Lorene put in front of her, and she had understood before she had the words for it that food was a language. That for some people it was the only way they knew how to say, "I see you, and I care about you, and you matter to me," because the actual words were too hard or too expensive or too far away. Geneva had opened her first restaurant at 32, then a second, then a third, all in Charleston, all built from scratch. She lost everything in 2008. The recession took all 3. She rebuilt once, smaller, 1 location. She ran it for 6 years, and then she closed it herself. Not because it failed, because she realized that the thing she was best at was not running a kitchen. It was teaching someone else how to run one. The best meal she had ever made, she would say later, was someone else's future. She had started Second Table 4 years ago. Free. Open to anyone over 18, with a willingness to show up 3 nights a week. No tuition, no application essay, no prerequisites. Just a kitchen, a teacher, and a door that stayed open. On the 4th day, Shanice picked up the card. She turned it over. There was a phone number on the back handwritten in blue ink. She held it for a long moment, then she called. The conversation was short. Shanice said, "Does it meet during the day?" Geneva said no. 7 in the evening to 9:30. 3 nights a week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Shanice said, "I have a 7-year-old daughter." Geneva said, "The program has free childcare on site." A long pause. The kind of pause that holds more than silence. The kind that holds a woman standing in her kitchen at 9 in the morning on a Friday, holding a business card in one hand and the phone in the other, with a shift starting in 4 hours, and a daughter at school, and an envelope with $85 in the drawer behind the aluminum foil, and an entire life that has been moving in the same direction for 6 years without once asking her where she wanted to go. Shanice said, "Why do you do this?" Geneva said, "Because 40 years ago, someone opened a door for me, and I walked through it, and everything I have started the moment I stepped through." Shanice was quiet. Then she said, "Okay." One word. But inside that word was 2 months of saving. An envelope of $85. A white napkin placed perfectly on a 7-year-old's lap. A restaurant that asked her to leave. A bench on Meeting Street with taco wrappers. A kitchen table at midnight. And a child who had asked her mother if they had done something wrong. Shanice walked into the first class on a Tuesday evening in late May. She brought Zuri, who went to the childcare room without complaint because there were crayons and a girl her age already coloring at the table. Shanice tied on an apron that was not her own in a kitchen that was not Benny's, and she stood at a station with a cutting board and a knife and waited. Geneva stood at the front of the room. 12 students, all adults, all working. A bus driver from West Ashley, a home health aide from James Island, a man who stocked shelves at a warehouse on Rivers Avenue and wanted something different, a woman who had cooked for her family of 7 for 20 years and had never once been told she was good at it. Geneva did not give a speech. She did not welcome them formally or tell them what the program would do for their lives. She said, "The culinary industry will tell you that you need a degree to belong in a professional kitchen. That degree costs somewhere between $35,000 and $60,000 for a 2-year program. If you are making $12 an hour, that is 6 to 8 years of your entire income before taxes. They will tell you that you need connections, that you need a name, that the door to a real kitchen only opens from the inside." She paused. She looked at the room. She said, 76% of head chefs at fine dining restaurants in this country are men. Less than 7% of executive chef positions at top-rated restaurants are held by women. For women of color, that number is so small it barely registers in the data. She said, 34 million people in this country live with food insecurity, and here is the part nobody talks about. The people who cook the meals that wealthy people eat are very often the same people who cannot afford to feed their own families. The person making your $40 plate of salmon is skipping lunch because lunch is not in the budget. She said programs like this one exist because the system was not built for you. Careers through culinary arts, hot bread kitchen in New York, workforce development at community colleges across this country, food fight, second table. We are all doing the same thing. We are building a door where there was not one. She looked at Shanice, not specifically, not with any signal or acknowledgement. She looked at the room the way a person looks at a room full of people who have shown up despite every reason not to. She said, "The only thing you actually need to belong in a kitchen is an understanding of what food means to a person who is hungry. If you know that you already have the most important thing a chef can carry, everything else I can teach you." The first week was knife work. Julienne, Brunoise, Chiffonade, Geneva stood at the front of the kitchen and demonstrated each cut, once slowly, then once at full speed. And then she said, "Now you." 12 students, 12 cutting boards, 12 knives moving at 12 different speeds. Shanice was the slowest. Her hands moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had spent 3 years cutting onions at Benny's, but had never once been told there was a name for what she was doing, or a standard for how thin the strips should be. She was slower than the bus driver from West Ashley, slower than the warehouse worker, slower than the woman who had cooked for 7 and never been told she was good at it. But her cuts were even, every single one, not fast, not flashy, just even. The kind of even that comes from hands that have learned to pay attention to what they are holding because they have never had the luxury of being careless with anything, Geneva noticed. She walked past Shanice's station during the first class and looked at her cutting board and did not say a word. She moved on. Week 3. Sauce beurre blanc. Butter white wine shallots. A technique that requires patience and temperature control and the willingness to fail and start again. Shanice failed 4 times in a row. The butter broke. The emulsion separated. She poured it out and started over. And it broke again. And she stood at the stove with her hands flat on the counter and her jaw set, and the particular frustration of someone who is not used to being bad at things because she has spent her entire life making sure she was at least competent enough to survive. Geneva walked over. She looked at the pot. She said, "If you want to be perfect the first time you try something, you are in the wrong industry." Shanice looked at her. Geneva said, "The sauce does not care how many times you fail. It only cares whether you come back to the stove." She came back to the stove the 5th time it held. The 2nd month nearly ended everything. Zuri got sick, a fever that started on a Wednesday night and climbed to 103 by Thursday morning. Shanice stayed home. She called in sick to Benny's. She called the cleaning company and told them she could not come. She sat beside Zuri's bed with a wet cloth and a bottle of children's ibuprofen, and she did not sleep for 31 hours. On Friday, she called Geneva. She said, "I cannot come this week. My daughter is sick. I am sorry." Geneva said. "Is she okay?" Shanice said. "She will be. She just needs me here." Geneva said. "Then be there." She paused. She said, "The door is still open. It does not close because you stumbled." Shanice missed a week. Then she missed a 2nd week because Zuri was better, but the cleaning company had given her shifts away, and she had to pick up extra hours at Benny's to cover the gap, and there was no time and no money, and the math of her life did not leave room for a thing that did not pay. On the 15th day, Miss Thelma knocked on her door. She stood in the hallway in her housecoat and her slippers, and she looked at Shanice, and she said, "Baby girl is fine. She is on my couch, eating crackers and watching cartoons, and she is fine. Go." "Shanice," said Miss Thelma. "I cannot ask you to." Miss Thelma said, "You are not asking. I am telling. Go. Do not let anything stop you." Shanice went back. She walked into the kitchen 20 minutes late on a Tuesday night and took her place at the station, and nobody asked where she had been because everyone in that room had their own version of the same story. The bus driver had missed a week because his transmission blew. The home health aide had missed 2 days because her client's family changed her schedule without asking. The warehouse worker had almost quit because his manager told him cooking school was a waste of time for a man his age. They had all almost stopped. They were all still here. At 9:15 that night, after the rest of the class had cleaned their stations and gone home, Shanice stayed. She was practicing plating. A piece of grilled chicken on a white plate, a drizzle of reduction across the rim, a sprig of thyme placed at an angle that Geneva had shown them that evening. Zuri was asleep on a chair in the childcare room next door. Through the glass window that separated the kitchen from the hallway, Shanice could see her daughter curled on her side with a crayon still in her hand and a coloring page half finished on the table beside her. Shanice looked at her. Then she looked back at the plate. She placed the thyme with fingers that shook slightly. Not from fear, not from cold. From the unfamiliar sensation of doing something that was not for rent or groceries or electricity or bus fare or Zuri's school supplies or Miss Thelma's $40, something that was just for her. For the first time in 6 years, her hands were building something that did not belong to the business of surviving. They were building something that belonged to her. She placed the sprig. She stepped back. The plate sat on the stainless steel counter under the fluorescent lights of a donated kitchen in a converted church basement in downtown Charleston. It was not perfect. The sauce was a little heavy on the left side. The chicken could have been placed half an inch to the right, but it was hers. She had made it. and it was the most beautiful plate of food she had ever seen. By month 4, something changed. It was not dramatic. It was not a single moment. It was the slow accumulation of 100 small things happening in the right direction, the way a river changes the shape of a stone, not through force, but through persistence. Shanice stopped following recipes exactly. She began tasting as she went, adjusting, adding something that was not on the page because something in her knew it belonged there. She seasoned by memory. The smell of her mother's kitchen on Dorchester Road when she was small. The way onions smelled when they hit oil at the right temperature. The sauce her grandmother used to make a woman named Rochelle, who had never read a cookbook in her life and who cooked entirely by feel, by the weight of salt between her fingers, by the color of a broth when it had simmered long enough, by the sound oil makes when it is ready and the silence it makes when it is not. Geneva saw it. She stood behind Shanice one evening in month 5 and watched her adjust a reduction without measuring anything. Shanice tasted, added a pinch of something, tasted again, nodded once to herself, and moved on. Geneva said, "Where did you learn that?" Shanice said. "Learn what Geneva said, to trust your hands more than the recipe." Shanice looked at her. She said, "My grandmother. She never measured anything in her life. She just knew." Geneva said, "Technique. I can teach. What you have, the thing that is rooted in every meal you remember and every meal you went, without that I cannot teach anyone, that is yours." There was a conversation in month 7 that neither of them forgot. It was late. The other students had left. Shanice and Geneva were cleaning the kitchen together, the way they had started doing after every Tuesday class. Not because it was required, but because there was something about wiping down counters and stacking pots in silence side by side that made certain conversations possible that would not have happened sitting across a table. Geneva said, "My mother fed 400 children a day for 22 years, $6.50 an hour. When she retired, the school hired someone else, and nobody said her name again. Not at the school. Not at the district office. Nowhere. She fed an entire generation of children on that island, and she disappeared. She wrung the cloth out under the faucet. She said, 'I opened a restaurant to put her name on the wall. I lost it. I opened another one and lost that too. I opened a third and closed it myself.' She paused. She said, 'But I teach you. And if you cook the way she cooked with that same thing in your hands that she had in hers, then her name is still alive. It just lives in a different kitchen now.'" Shanice did not say anything for a long moment. She folded the towel. She set it on the counter. She said, "My grandmother Rochelle made oxtail stew every Sunday for everyone on the block. She never charged. She never counted. She just cooked, and people came, and she fed them." Geneva looked at her. Shanice said, "She died when I was 14. Nobody on that block makes oxtail stew on Sundays anymore." Geneva said, "Then you know exactly what I am talking about." For her final project in month 8, each student was required to present a concept for a restaurant, not a business plan, not a menu, a philosophy, what kind of food, for whom, and why. Most students presented traditional ideas. A soul food restaurant, a brunch spot, a food truck specializing in one thing done well. Shanice presented something different. She described a kitchen that did not throw food away. Not a single plate scraped into the trash. Every leftover, every trim, every surplus portion would be redirected, cooked again, into community meals, served free once a week to families who could not afford to eat at the restaurant but deserved to eat the same quality of food as the people who could. She called it a closed circle. The restaurant feeds its customers. Its customers fund its kitchen. Its kitchen feeds the community. Nothing wasted, nothing lost. She said 80 million tons of food are thrown away in this country every year, and 34 million people do not have enough to eat. The food is there. It is just going to the wrong place. Geneva stood at the back of the room. She did not correct anything. She did not add a note. She did not suggest a revision. For the first time in 12 classes, she simply listened to a student finish and said nothing at all. And that silence from a woman who had spent 35 years in kitchens and had an opinion about everything that happened inside them said more than any praise could have. And while Shanice was learning to cook in a church basement 3 nights a week, 7 blocks south on King Street, Le Vesper was falling apart. It started with the head chef. His name was Martin Caldwell. He had been running the kitchen at Le Vesper for 2.5 years, and he left on a Wednesday in September with 1 week notice. The reason he gave was another opportunity. The reason that was real was that he was making $62,000 a year in a kitchen that generated $1.4 million in annual revenue, and he had been asking for a raise for 8 months and had been told each time that the budget did not allow it. The budget allowed fresh flowers on every table twice a week at $18 per arrangement. The budget allowed a new sound system installed in July. The budget did not allow a raise for the man who cooked every plate of food that left the kitchen. 2 line cooks followed him within the month. One went to a restaurant in Mount Pleasant that paid $3 more an hour and did not require split shifts. The other simply stopped coming. She did not call. She did not email. She was 23 years old, and she had been working 60-hour weeks for 9 months, and one morning she woke up and decided she was done. The industry loses people like that every day, quietly, without exit interviews, without explanation. They just stop showing up because the job took more than it gave, and at some point the math stopped making sense. This is the truth about the restaurant industry in America. 60% of new restaurants close within 3 years. The turnover rate in food service is the highest of any industry in the country, roughly 75% per year. The people who prepare the food that fills the most beautiful rooms in every city are among the lowest paid and most overworked professionals in the labor market. Good chefs are not rare because there is a shortage of talented people. Good chefs are rare because the industry burns through talented people faster than it can replace them. Le Vesper's Google reviews dropped from 4.6 to 3.9 in 11 weeks. The comments were specific: inconsistent food, long wait times. A dish that used to be the best thing on the menu now tasted different every night because a different person was cooking it every night. The regulars started going elsewhere. The weekday reservations thinned. The Friday night wait list that used to fill by Wednesday morning was half empty by Thursday. Donovan Price called from Atlanta. He owned Le Vesper, but he had not been inside it in 4 months. He ran 2 other businesses, a consulting firm and a real estate development company, and Le Vesper was the one he talked about at dinner parties, but did not think about between them. He called Victoria. He said, "The reviews are a disaster." "What is happening?" Victoria said. "We lost the head chef and 2 line cooks. I have been running the kitchen with temps and it is not holding," Donovan said. "Then find someone. I am not paying King Street rent to read 3-star reviews on Google." Victoria said, "I have been trying. I have interviewed 4 candidates. One wanted $90,000. One had 6 months of experience. 2 did not want the position once they saw the hours." Donovan said, "Try harder." He hung up. Victoria sat at the bar after that call. It was 11 at night. The restaurant was empty. The chairs were stacked on some tables and not on others because the closing staff had been cut from 3 to 2, and they did not always finish before they left. The candle holders still had wax in them from the evening service. A water ring sat on the bar top where someone had set a glass down without a coaster. She looked around the room, the same room she had managed for 4 years, the same velvet chairs, the same hardwood floors, the same soft lighting that made everything look expensive and curated and deliberate. But tonight, for the first time, she did not see any of that. She saw 17 tables, and most of them had been empty by 8:30. She saw a kitchen that could not hold a head chef. She saw a building that was beautiful on the outside and coming apart on the inside. The way things come apart when the people who actually make them work are not paid enough to stay. She thought about something she had not thought about in months. She thought about a Tuesday night, a woman and a little girl at table 14, an envelope with $85, a child who asked her mother if they had done something wrong. She did not know why she thought about it. She had not thought about it since it happened. She had filed it away the way she filed away every difficult interaction in the part of her mind where things go that she does not want to examine. But tonight, sitting alone in a restaurant that was quietly failing, it came back. Not the woman's face, not the child's voice, just the envelope, the white envelope sitting on the table, and the fact that every dollar inside it was real. It was a Tuesday night in month 10. The other students had gone home. Shanice was cleaning her station. The way she always did, slowly, thoroughly. The counters wiped in long, even strokes. The knives dried and placed in the roll in the same order every time. Geneva was standing by the sink with her arms crossed and a look on her face that Shanice had not seen before. Not stern, not warm, something between those two things, something careful. She said, "Shanice, sit down for a minute." Shanice looked at her. She set the towel on the counter. She sat on the stool at the end of the prep table. Geneva did not sit. She stood across from her with the stainless steel counter between them and the fluorescent light buzzing overhead and the quiet of a kitchen that had just finished working. She said, "There is something I need to tell you. And I should have told you a long time ago." Shanice waited. She did not ask. She had learned over 10 months that Geneva said things when she was ready and not a moment before. Pushing did not help. Waiting did. Geneva said, "The restaurant where you were turned away. Le Vesper, I know the owner. His name is Donovan Price. His mother Claudette was my closest friend for 30 years. She died 6 years ago. Before she passed, I helped Donovan open that restaurant. I guided the menu. I advised on the kitchen layout. I helped him hire his first head chef." She paused. She said, "I stepped away 3 years in. His vision for the restaurant went in a direction I did not agree with. He wanted exclusivity. I wanted accessibility. We did not fight about it. I simply left. But I have known about that restaurant since before it had a name on the door. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigeration unit hummed behind them. A faucet dripped once, twice, then stopped." Shanice looked at Geneva. She did not move. She was reading the last 10 months again. Every conversation, every lesson, every evening in this kitchen. She was rereading all of it under a different light, the way you reread a letter when you realize the person who wrote it knew something you did not. She said, "Did you bring me into this program because of that restaurant?" Geneva said no. She said it without hesitation, without looking away. She said, "I brought you in because of what I saw that night. The way you stood, the way you held your daughter's hand, the way you walked out of that room without bending your spine a single degree. That is what I saw. That is why I came to Benny's the next morning," she said. "The fact that I know Donovan is a second truth, but both truths are real. And the fact that they are both true at the same time does not make either one less honest." Shanice was quiet for a long time. She looked at the counter. She looked at her hands. The same hands that had been cutting onions at Benny's a year ago. The same hands that had failed at Sauce Beurre Blanc 4 times in a row. The same hands that had placed a sprig of thyme on a plate at 9:15 at night while her daughter slept in the next room. She said, "Is that restaurant looking for a chef?" Geneva said, "I do not know. But if they are, I would not recommend you because you need a job. I would recommend you because you are good enough for the kitchen." Shanice looked at her. She said, "I am not good enough yet." Geneva said, "You will be. 2 more months." Something moved between them in that silence. Not forgiveness because there was nothing to forgive. Not trust restored because the trust had never been broken. Just clarity. The particular clarity that comes when someone chooses honesty over comfort, and the person receiving it recognizes the cost of that choice. Shanice picked up the towel. She finished cleaning her station. She did not say anything else. Neither did Geneva. Some conversations end not because everything has been said, but because what was said was enough, and both people know it. 2 months later, the phone call came. Donovan Price called Geneva from Atlanta on a Friday morning. He said, "I need help. The kitchen is falling apart. I cannot find a chef." Geneva said, "I have someone." Donovan said, "Who?" Geneva said, "The person I trust most in a kitchen right now." Donovan said, "Experience." Geneva said, 12 months of formal training. 3 years in a working kitchen before that, and a lifetime of understanding what food means. There was a pause on the line. Donovan said, "Geneva, I need someone who can run a fine dining kitchen on King Street, not a student." "Geneva," said Donovan, "your mother asked me once what the most important quality in a chef was. I told her it was not technique, it was not credentials. It was the ability to make a person feel seen through a plate of food. This woman has that. She has had it longer than she has had anything else." Donovan was quiet. Then he said, "Send her in Monday." Shanice stood in front of Le Vesper at 7 in the morning on a Monday in late May. The restaurant was closed. The chairs inside were stacked on the tables. The front windows reflected the early sunlight off King Street, and the glass was dark behind it. She looked at the front door. The same door she had walked through 1 year ago with $85 in a white envelope and her daughter's hand in hers. The same door she had walked out of with her spine straight and her heart in pieces and a 7-year-old girl asking her if they had done something wrong. She did not go in through the front door. She turned left. She walked down the narrow alley that ran along the side of the building past the dumpsters and the grease trap and the stack of empty produce boxes leaning against the brick wall. She reached the back entrance. A heavy steel door painted gray, the kind of door that does not have a handle on the outside because it is only meant to open from within. She knocked. A man in an apron opened it. He looked at her. She said, "Shanice Odom. I am the new head chef." He stepped aside. She walked in. The smell hit her first. Stainless steel, gas, dish soap. The sharp underneath scent of a commercial kitchen that has been cooking for years, the smell that sinks into the walls and the floors and the ventilation ducts and never fully leaves. She knew that smell. She had lived inside it for 3 years at Benny's. She had woken up with it in her hair and gone to sleep with it on her clothes, and she had never once thought of it as anything other than work. Now she stood in it, and it meant something different. A young line cook looked up from the prep station. He said, "Can I help you?" She said, "I am Shanice. I am running this kitchen starting today." She put on the chef coat, white, clean, the first one she had ever worn that had her name on it. Geneva had arranged it. The name was stitched in dark thread on the left side of the chest, Shanice Odom. She ran her fingers over the letters once quickly, the way you touch something you have been waiting for to make sure it is real. She stood at the main stove. The same kitchen she had never been allowed to see from the dining room side. 1 year ago, she had sat at table 14, the worst table in the house, and the kitchen behind the pass-through window had been a wall of noise and steam and light she was not supposed to look at. Now she was standing inside it. Her hands shook. Not from fear, not from cold, from the distance between where she had been standing 12 months ago and where she was standing now. From the weight of all the mornings at 5:15 and all the evenings at 9:30 and all the onions and all the sauces and all the plates she had arranged in a church basement while her daughter slept in the next room, all of it compressed into the fact of standing here, in this kitchen, in this coat. She picked up a knife. She began. She did not cook from a recipe. She cooked from memory. The smell of her grandmother Rochelle's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. The weight of salt between her fingers, the way Rochelle had taught her before she had the words to explain why it mattered. The 400 meals a day that Lorene Hart had cooked in a school cafeteria on Johns Island for 22 years without anyone remembering her name. The taste of a $3 taco eaten on a bench on Meeting Street the night everything broke. She cooked from all of it. Every meal she remembered, every meal she had gone without, every plate of food that had ever meant something more than just eating. The first dish left the pass-through window at 6:45 that evening. Victoria was in the dining room, adjusting a table setting near the front. She did not see it. She did not know yet. The service ran. Tickets came in. Shanice called them out. The kitchen moved. Not the frantic shouting, crashing movement of a kitchen in trouble. Something else. Something tighter. Warmer. More precise. The line cooks noticed it within the first hour. The new chef did not yell. She spoke in a steady voice that carried across the kitchen without ever rising above the sound of the stove. She said, "Please." She said thank you, she said behind you when she passed, and heard when someone called an order and take your time, do it right, when a cook rushed a plate that was not ready. They had never heard those words from a head chef in this kitchen. Not once in the 2.5 years most of them had been here. At 9:45 the last ticket went out. The kitchen began to clean. The line cooks wiped their stations. The dishwasher ran the final load. Shanice stood at the pass-through window and checked every plate before it left and caught 2 that were not right and fixed them herself without saying a word about it to the cook who made them. She would talk to him tomorrow. Tonight was not the night for correction. Tonight was the night for the kitchen to feel what it was like to work under someone who respected them. Victoria came through the kitchen door at 10:15. She came to check the closing procedures the way she did every night. A clipboard in one hand, the same blazer she always wore, the same pulled-back hair, the same posture that made her look taller than she was. She walked through the doorway, and she saw the woman standing at the center station, wiping down the stainless steel counter with a clean cloth. She stopped. The recognition did not come all at once. It came in layers. First the face, something familiar, something she could not immediately place. Then the eyes, dark, steady, level. The same eyes she had looked into a year ago at table 14 when she had said the words that she had said. Then the memory, all of it, the envelope, the little girl, the birthday dinner, the words she had used. This may not be the most suitable setting for your family tonight. Victoria stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room, the exact same spot where she had stood 1 year ago when she asked a mother and her daughter to leave. She said, "You are." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Shanice looked at her. She set the cloth down on the counter. She said, "I am the head chef of this restaurant." That was all. She did not say, "Do you remember me?" She did not say, "You asked me to leave." She did not ask for an apology or offer a confrontation or deliver the kind of speech that a person delivers when they have spent a year imagining this moment. She had not spent a year imagining this moment. She had spent a year learning to cook. The fact that she was standing here was not revenge. It was not justice. It was simply what happened when a woman who had been told she did not belong in a room decided to walk back into it through a different door. She picked up the cloth. She went back to cleaning her station. Victoria stood in the doorway. She did not move. She did not speak. She stood there, in the space between the kitchen and the dining room, the border between the 2 worlds that had always existed inside this building, the world that served and the world that was served, and for the first time in her 4 years of standing in that exact spot, she did not know which one she belonged to. She looked down at her hands. She thought about that night, not about Shanice, about the child, about the girl in the dress, made from 2 old ones who had sat at the table with her napkin placed perfectly on her lap and her hands folded exactly right. About the question. The question that had followed Victoria home that night and had sat in a corner of her mind for 12 months like something she could not throw away and could not open. Mama, did we do something wrong? She remembered that question. She had always remembered it. She had remembered it on every night she closed this restaurant alone and walked to her car and drove home and sat in her apartment and told herself she was doing her job. She remembered it now, standing in the doorway looking at the woman in the chef coat whose name was stitched over her heart. She turned. She walked back to the dining room. She did not say anything. Neither did Shanice. The kitchen was quiet. The stoves were off. The lights hummed. And somewhere in the silence between 2 women who had nothing left to say to each other, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way things shift when the ground you have been standing on for a long time turns out to be different from what you thought it was. Geneva walked into Le Vesper on a Thursday evening 3 weeks after Shanice started. She had not told Shanice she was coming. She walked to the hostess stand. A young woman she did not recognize looked up and smiled. She said, "Do you have a reservation?" Geneva said. "Table 7. The name is Geneva Hart." The hostess checked her screen. She said, "Right this way. Table 7. The same table. the same chair by the window facing King Street, the same angle of evening light coming through the glass and landing on the white linen in long gold rectangles. Geneva sat down. She placed her napkin on her lap. She looked around the room, the same velvet chairs, the same hardwood floors, the same soft lighting. But the room felt different. She could not say exactly how. Something in the way the waitstaff moved. Something in the sound of the kitchen coming through the pass-through window. Not the sharp, urgent clatter of a kitchen under pressure, but something steadier, something closer to rhythm. She looked through the pass-through. She could see Shanice, white coat, hands moving, calling out orders in a voice that did not need to shout to be heard. 1 year ago, Geneva had sat in this exact chair and watched a woman and her daughter get asked to leave. She had put her fork down and had not picked it up again. Tonight, she sat in the same chair and watched that same woman run the kitchen. The food arrived. A roasted beet salad, a grilled chicken with a reduction sauce, and a sprig of thyme placed at an angle on the rim of the plate. Geneva looked at it. She picked up her fork. She took a bite. She closed her eyes. The flavor was not just correct. It was not just well-seasoned or well-timed or well-balanced. It was something else, something deeper. The particular quality of food that has been cooked by someone who understands that a meal is never just a meal, that it is always proof that someone thought of you, that someone stood in a kitchen and decided that your hunger mattered enough to do something about it. Geneva had tasted that before. In her mother's cafeteria kitchen on John's Island, in her own restaurants before she lost them, in the rarest and best meals she had eaten in 35 years in this industry. It was not a technique. It could not be taught. It could only be carried by a person who had been both hungry and fed, and who understood the difference between those two things, not as a concept, but as a memory that lived in their hands. She set her fork down. She sat there for a moment. She had been diagnosed with a heart condition 2 years ago. She had not told anyone, not her students, not Shanice, not the doctors at the free clinic on Calhoun Street where she went every 3 months to check whether the numbers had changed. She had started second table because she believed in it. She had accelerated it because she knew that time was not a thing she could assume. She had taken more students, taught more classes, stayed later, pushed harder. Because there is a particular urgency that comes when you realize that the thing you are building may need to outlive you, and you are not sure yet whether it will. Shanice was not her only student. But Shanice was the one in whom Geneva saw herself most clearly. The same stubbornness, the same refusal to bend, the same hands that moved through a kitchen like they were answering a question that had been asked a long time ago. Geneva asked the waiter to tell the chef she would like a word. A minute later, Shanice came out of the kitchen, sauce on her coat, her hands still warm. She stood beside table 7 and looked at Geneva. Geneva said, "My mother would have been proud of this." Shanice looked at her. She said, "Miss Thelma, my neighbor said the exact same thing last night when I brought leftovers home." Geneva laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes out before you can shape it or control it. The kind that fills a room and makes everyone in it feel like something just happened that was worth being present for. Shanice laughed too. Standing there in her white coat in the dining room of the restaurant that had once told her she did not belong, she laughed. And, for a moment, the kitchen and the dining room and the pass-through window between them and the year that had passed and the years before that, all compressed into the sound of 2 women laughing in a room that had finally become what it was supposed to be. In the weeks that followed, Le Vesper changed. Not just the reviews, which climbed back up to 4.5 within 2 months. Not just the reservations, which filled again. Something else. Something that did not show up in any metric or rating or Google comment. The kitchen changed. The culture of it. The way people moved inside it. Shanice did not run her kitchen the way the previous chef had. She did not shout. She did not throw. She did not make a single person feel small for making a mistake. She called every member of her staff by their first name, from the dishwasher to the sous chef. She said, "Please," and she said, "Thank you," and she said, "Take your time and get it right." She said it every night, And every night the food that left that kitchen carried something in it that had not been there before. Not a new ingredient, not a new technique, just the quiet evidence of a kitchen where people were treated like they mattered. She created a program, one table, every week, reserved for a family that could not afford to eat at Le Vesper but had every right to sit in one of its chairs. No application, no proof of income, no question. Just a table with a small card placed on the linen that read, "Welcome. You belong here." Donovan called from Atlanta when he heard about it. He said, "We are giving away a table every week." Shanice said, "We are not giving anything away. We are paying a debt this restaurant has owed since the day it opened." Donovan was quiet. Then he said, "Fine." Victoria was not fired. Shanice had asked Donovan to keep her. He had been surprised. He had asked why. Shanice said firing her would be easy, changing what she sees when she looks at a person that is the real work. Victoria stayed. She did not apologize, not in words, but every evening before service began, she was the one who walked to the reserved table and placed the card on the linen herself. "Welcome. You belong here." She placed it with both hands. She straightened it until it was centered. And then she went back to the podium and did her job. Zuri came to the restaurant on a Saturday afternoon in June. She was 8 years old now. She wore a new dress, not stitched from 2 old ones, but bought from a real store on King Street with money Shanice had earned from a kitchen that bore her name. She sat down at a table in the corner. Table 14. The same table, the same seat by the kitchen door. The worst table in the house. She did not know that. She did not know it had ever meant anything. She sat down and she opened the menu and she ordered dessert, a chocolate mousse with a gold leaf on top, and when it arrived, she ate it slowly with a small spoon, and she smiled the way a child smiles when the world is exactly what it should be. Shanice watched her through the pass-through window, from the kitchen side, the side she had earned. She watched her daughter sit in the chair where everything had started and eat dessert and smile. And that image, that single image, answered the question that had been sitting in the center of this story since a 7-year-old girl asked it in the middle of a restaurant on a Tuesday night. "No, baby, you did not do anything wrong." In the apartment on Dorchester Road in North Charleston, in the kitchen drawer behind the aluminum foil, the white envelope still sat where Shanice had put it 1 year ago. $85. Not spent, not added to, just there. A reminder that everything, the knife skills and the sauces, and the church basement, and the chef coat, and the kitchen on King Street, all of it had started with a dinner she was never allowed to eat. Some doors do not open when you push on them. They open when you walk around the building and find a different way in. Some rooms do not welcome you the first time. They wait until you come back with something they cannot turn away. Dignity is not something you earn by changing your clothes or your bank account. It is something you carry, and the people who cannot see it are telling you about their own blindness, not your worth. There are meals you eat and forget, and there are meals that change the way you see the world. The difference is never the ingredients. This story is fiction, but it is built on real experiences shared by real people, working people, mothers and fathers and single parents and night shift workers who have walked into rooms where they were judged before they spoke, who were measured by what they wore instead of what they carried inside them. The culinary mentorship programs in this story are real. Organizations like Careers Through Culinary Arts program known as CCAP and Hot Bread Kitchen in New York, and workforce development programs at community colleges across this country are changing lives every year. They are building doors where there were none. If you or someone you know is looking for a way in, look them up. The door is there. I wrote this story because I believe the most dangerous thing in our society is not poverty. It is the quiet agreement that poor people deserve less respect, that a person in $9 shoes has less right to sit in a room than a person in $90 ones. If this story made you uncomfortable, good, sit with that. If it touched you or challenged you or made you think about the way you see the people around you, subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because the truth is, People may forget your name. They may forget your face. They may forget what you owned. But they will never forget who treated them with dignity when the world did not. They will never forget who opened a door for them when every other door was closed. And they will never forget who fed them when they were hungry. Shanice walked back into Le Vesper, but not as a customer. She came back as the person who feeds the room, and that made all the difference. Was her return justice, or was it something beyond justice? A kind of grace that the restaurant did not earn but desperately needed. Tell me what you think in the comments. And until next time, stay kind, stay steady, and never believe that what you do for someone else is too small to matter.